Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto finds Kushina after 18 years and she falls in love with him part 2. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this and comment for next part. And now let's start the fanfic. Hinata turned to Sakura, "You're joking right? Just as Hinata had affected Shino, Shino had affected Hinata. She could be so sarcastic sometimes." When Sakura's glare didn't lessen she sighed, "That is nothing abnormal in our life Sakura," she said. Sakura turned an incredulous eye on Hinata. "Think about it," she said, "how exactly could you have clans without inbreeding to some degree? Without it, clans would fade from lack of purity. That is nothing different with the two of them. Though I doubt they actually did it," she said. Sakura's gaze softened slightly but she still looked slightly disgusted. "That's just wrong," she said as she sat back down and clung to Lee. The rest of the table sighed but Shizune suddenly spoke up. "For cousins, it is okay in clans though," she said. Naruto's eyes widened and he started to speak. "Shizune Nichan-dan, but even for clans, mothers and sons aren't allowed," she said, drawing confused looks from everyone but Naruto and Kushina. Kushina looked down and pushed away from Naruto. Naruto's heart clenched. He liked being close to her, even if it was just teasing. He rounded on Shizune. "What are you saying?" he asked in a dangerous tone, causing them to all look at him. Shizune met his gaze. "I know who Kushina is Naruto, I was with Tsunade-sama when she left." "Don't try to lie to me," she said. Naruto scoffed. "You didn't think there was a reason I was keeping that away from them?" he said as they all stared at him in shock, going back and forth from Kushina's downward gaze and Naruto's burning blue orbs. "Where was she Naruto? Why are you doing stuff like that? She is supposed to be dead," she said with no small amount of force behind her voice. She was pissed as she believed Kushina abandoned Naruto. Naruto turned to Kushina. "Would you like to tell her, or should I?" he asked quietly. Kushina simply put a hand on his leg under the table. No one saw her hand move but Naruto turned back to Shizune and his table of friends. "This is not my cousin, she is my mother," he said, drawing gasps from everyone. Many started to glare at Kushina. Naruto's ki filled the area as he glared at them all, drawing Kushina's gaze to his eyes full of blazing determination. "She was tricked on the day of my birth and she has not been back here since. I have heard her full story and forgiven her. If my actions weren't enough evidence, I hold no grudge towards her and neither should any of you. Her actions were not the best but understandable considering her circumstances. Do not hold this against her. Try to get to know her like I am," he said as his voice softened slightly when he looked down at her emerald orbs full of thanks. Most everyone nodded, though Shizune still glared at Kushina. Naruto turned the full force of his ki on her, causing Kiba to growl slightly. "Stop it Shizune," he said, dropping her honorific. "I have dealt with it and it is none of your concern. If you wish, the full story lies with Ba-chan and she might tell you. Though if you continue glaring at Kushina-chan like that, I might have to have her put a restraining order on you," he threatened. Shizune's eyes showed her shock as she stared into Naruto's eyes. "Kushina-chan?" Temari questioned. This brought everyone out of their stunned silence to realize he had never answered their second question. Naruto turned to Temari. "Yes. So," he said as Kushina was now looking forward with steel in her eyes. She drew strength from Naruto defending her. It showed he truly forgave her and was willing to work past it. "You don't call your Ka-san by their name Naruto," she replied. Naruto shrugged. "I don't recognize her as my mother," he said to the shock of the gathering. "What do you mean by that?" Kiba shouted. "What he means," Kushina said for the first time since the argument started, "is that he offered me two choices when he met me last night." Her gaze panned around the table, taking in many curious glances. "After explaining to him my situation, he offered for me to continue trying to be his mother, and lose him as he would push me away," she said with sadness in her voice. "Or, become his friend and build a relationship this way. Since I am here, You can see what route I chose, she said. That's insane, Naruto baka, Ino said with vehemence. Is it? He stated coldly, making everyone flinch. You all know what my childhood was like. I had no one to raise me, no one tucked me in at night, and no one taught me anything I know. I was my own parent. I will not recognize someone who has not been here my whole life as my mother simply because she shares my food. How would you like it if some stranger just came up to you now and told you that you should listen to them because they were related to you? He asked. The whole table looked down, but Kankuro spoke up. She is still your mother, he said. Naruto turned to him. I acknowledge she gave birth to me, but that is it. I do not call anyone Ka-san or Tu-san as you all once did. I was alone from my first birthday until my training trip. Do not presume that my own views are the same as yours. Naruto turned to Kushina. Do you believe I should immediately start listening to you because you suddenly showed up after 18 years of absence and say you are the person who gave me life? Yesterday Kushina would have said yes immediately. After talking with him today and seeing how mature he was, she hesitantly replied, no. I have spent the entire day with you, you don't need a mother. At this point in life, all parents are just friends to their children anyways, she said. Naruto turned back to his friends. I may seem uncaring, but I was well within my rights to ignore her. This is still a relationship, even if it is different from the norm. Then again, my life has never been normal, he said as he sat back. That still doesn't explain how you could flirt with her like that, Shizune accused. Naruto sighed as he looked sideways at Kushina. You're not going to like this, he whispered. Kushina stiffened even more as Naruto spoke. No, I suppose it doesn't, but do you know what I see when I look at Kushina-chan? The group looked confused. I do not see a mother, or someone who you would label as untouchable, he said. Huh, Kiba said. An untouchable Kiba. To you, an untouchable would be Hana or Sum, someone you wouldn't even think of doing something perverted with, he said, explaining his definition. When you were all born, you have known your parents from the start. While you were growing up, you were shown who it was okay to date or show intimate gestures with. You have your own standards of who you would date, who you would be intimate with, and who you would avoid like the plague to not date. Right? He asked, gaining nods from everyone. I do not have an untouchable, he said. For so long, I have craved attention, I would take it from anyone. I am well aware of this fact. That is the reason I avoid getting attached to anyone, because it would be easy to manipulate me. Even if Ba-chan showed interest in me, I would return the gesture as she is one of my precious peoples. The only thing that would cause me to turn you down was if I didn't know you or you were cheating on someone, he said. When I look at Kushina-chan, I do not see a mother, I see the woman who gave birth to me, a woman with fiery red hair, which I love, emerald green eyes, a body like a goddess, and a sense of humor much like my own. I have no problems admitting to myself I would easily give in to her if she wished to have an intimate relationship despite our past, he said to more gasps. But let me ask you this, what exactly makes a person an untouchable? He said. Shocked looks were being pointed at him, and Naruto continued on, knowing he needed to explain this. Is it just because they carry the same blood, or is it because of something else? Tenten, you were adopted, right? He asked. Tenten nodded. So you are not related to your father by anything other than a piece of paper that says you are his daughter, correct? He asked. Again, Tenten nodded. Then what stops you from seeing him in a romantic light? He asked, drawing understanding from a few of the people around him, though many were still disgusted. I am not going to excuse my actions. I am simply trying to show you where I am coming from. I was never taught who it was okay to love and not to love. I love Kushina just as I love the rest of you, but that does not mean I am going to screw everyone here simply because of that. Think me sick in the head or not, but it doesn't matter because that is just the way I am and the way I have raised myself, he said as he finished his explanation. He turned back to look at Kushina, who had an odd expression on her face. Naruto sighed. This was not going to end well for him. That's disgusting, Sakura finally said. Ino, Lee, Kiba, and Shizune all nodded their heads. Sasuke glared at Naruto as did his brides. All of them stood and left the table, leaving Naruto to look down. I expected that. So what do the rest of you say? He asked. I think that you're probably screwed up in the head. Shikamaru said. But your logic is sound and the way you presented it actually makes sense. I can see how you think that way, Naruto. Though I wish you wouldn't. I can understand, and that leads me to empathizing with you. You're still a friend of mine. We all have our own quirks anyways, he said as the rest of the table nodded. I want to stay, Naruto, but Ino is going to get really pissed anyways. I'll talk to you later, man. Choji said as the strong man stood and followed his girlfriend out the bar. Naruto turned to Kushina, who looked back at him with clouded eyes. He sighed. Let's get you home. I think you have taken all of my convoluted thought processes you can handle, and we didn't even get a drink, he said. Kushina nodded and Naruto shunshined them to her apartment. Naruto let go of Kushina at the door and said, I'm sorry if that puts you in an awkward position, but that is the way I see it, he said while looking at her clouded eyes. If you don't wish to stay near me because of it, I will understand. A look of hurt flashed across his face, but Kushina was too confused to notice. Good night, Kushina-chan. I really enjoyed our day together, he said as he leaned in and kissed her on the cheek before he shunshined back to his own house. Naruto sighed as he walked into his house. Damn it, he cried as his door shut, locking him inside. Even if I saw her like that, it doesn't mean I wanted her knowing. He was pissed he had to defend himself and Kushina when all they had been doing was teasing each other. He knew the others would see it as wrong, but he had no such inhibitions. The fact she was one of the only women who had stayed near him without ulterior motives was a huge plus, and even though he had only known her for the equivalent of a day, it felt like she had been around much longer. Wanted who, knowing what brat? A female voice said as Naruto's sense finally kicked in. He sighed as he registered two presences in his house. Naruto rubbed his head sheepishly as he said, Watch it, Ba-chan, Arrow Senin. I just had a interesting night at the club with Kushina-chan. Tsunade and Jiraiya both nodded their heads. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Why didn't you tell me you are disgusted or something like my friends? He asked immediately. Tsunade and Jiraiya both sighed but smiled sadly. It is partly our fault you are like that. They were his godparents. Naruto nodded. We don't really have a problem with it. During the initial stages of our life, there was a lot more incest because of the small amount of clan members than there is in these days. Incest was just another way for some people to have fun. Besides, if Kushi-chan allows you to call her that, then there isn't a problem, is there? Tsunade said. Naruto blushed. He. What could be the more perfect story? Mother and son reunited after 18 years, Jiraiya said with a perverted leer. They share a night of passion, he said as he was pummeled into the ground by his beloved Tsunade's punch. Tsunade smiled at him. You remember what Kushina did the time you caught her? She asked sweetly. Jiraiya paled and he looked at Naruto to find him glaring at him. He was white as a ghost. He knew Naruto could beat his from here until Sunday. He smiled apologetically. Okay. No stories about you. He waved his hand placatingly. Both held smirks of satisfaction. Anyways, we just wanted to make sure you were okay, Tsunade said as she looked at Naruto. Naruto sighed and shook his head. I was, until Shizune went and blurted out something I was obviously trying to hide so my friends would get to know her without any prejudice, he said. Tsunade shook her head. She was always so level-headed. Kiba must have had that effect on her, she said. I'll have a talk with her. Naruto shook his head. No. Don't even tell her the story. If she wishes to be prejudiced against Kushina, then she is no better than the villagers were like in my youth, he said. That's pretty harsh, Naruto. Though it is a mature way of dealing with it, you force her to talk to you or Kushina to get past her problems, thus keeping other conflict from occurring, Jiraiya said. Naruto nodded. If that is all, I think I am going to go to bed, he said as he began to walk inside. Wait, how did you know what happened at the club? He asked. Tsunade smirked. Being Hokage has its advantages. Anbu are wonderful spies on my Odoto, she said. Naruto smiled slightly. Good night Ba-chan Aro Senin. The two Sannin smiled at each other before Tsunade linked her arm with Jiraiya's. She whispered into his ear and the two suddenly disappeared off the grounds. Naruto chuckled as he closed his door. Naruto went to bed wondering what Kushina's actions would be the next day. Kushina turned around and walked into her apartment. Her mind clouded with everything Naruto had said and confessed to. Her mind was whirling with the stories he had woven and the harshness of his childhood to his first ever C rank turning into AA rank. How screwed up the Chunin exams were and the invasion with him defeating a Jinchuriki who transformed into his own demon. She walked straight into her room and looked at her bed. How he had left Konoha with Jiraiya just to be attacked by Itachi Uchiha and Kisame Hoshigaki, two of the strongest shinobi of their time. Even she would have shied away from them. He had miraculously survived and headed on to meet Tsunade and win a bet with her to learn a technique his father took 3 years to master in a total of 3 weeks. She took her shoes off. She was surprised at his luck. He had managed to survive 2 attacks from the traitorous Orochimaru and attacks from Itachi and Kisame. All dangerous shinobi, she would be hard-pressed to fight even with her considerable skills. He was a survivor. But the facts that most took up her concentration was what he just admitted to. She allowed her body to simply fall onto her bed, still completely clothed as she let her face bury into her pillows, her mind replayed the club scene. She is just a woman with fiery red hair, which I love, a part of her that she had hated until Minato had rescued her and he immediately fell in love with it. With the body of a goddess and a sense of humor like my own. She blushed red as she heard him equate her to a goddess yet again. This time though, she knew it was anything but him just trying to flatter her as a friend. Those were his actual feelings on her. It gave her a warm feeling, much like earlier when he would tease her, that he could be so honest and that he saw her like that. She had not wanted a male companion since she left Konoha, but she enjoyed being complimented especially by such a handsome man as him. Something she could finally admit because of his speech. Then the ultimate question, would she push him away of his views? She turned to lay on her side as she pondered this. She was so dead set on being his mother that she hadn't seen anything past him being her son when she met him. She had gotten a glimpse of his body this morning and she had been hard-pressed to keep herself from trying to flirt with him. Though she might have done so, she had been doing it as harmless teasing that she meant not to go any farther. Obviously he did not see it that way. She thought back to the day she had spent with him. When he would make a joke during his stories she would giggle. When he would tease her, she would tease him back. She had easily fallen back into her old self while around him, her previous 18 years of moping all but being obliterated by his presence. She smiled as she thought of how vehemently he defended her in the club. She frowned as she thought of his views on intimacy though. That was something she had not expected. He was so well-rounded in his maturity she had expected him to be normal. But like he said, he was anything but normal. If that was his one quirk, would she condemn him for it and wind up losing her only connection to her family because of it? She sighed as she thought of it. She didn't know. Kushina turned over and fell asleep as thoughts of Naruto whirled in her head. A figure snuck through Naruto's house. The darkness of the house covered the figure as it quietly opened the door to Naruto's room. The figure spied Naruto laying on his back as his steady breathing was indicated by the rise and fall of his bare chest. His legs were tangled up in some sheets as it was obvious he had a restless night. If you could tell anything about the figure, you could see the grin on its face. The figure creeped past the bed and to the opposite side of the bedroom. The figure smirked as it grabbed the curtains and flung them wide, letting the bright sun into the room. Naruto groaned as his arm came up and blocked his eyes from the dastardly sun rays. Oof, Naruto said as a weight settled on his hips. He squinted as his eyes adjusted to the bright rays. Ohio Naruto-kun. Kushina's voice chirped as she looked down on him from her position straddling his hips. She was wearing the same form-fitting outfit as yesterday morning. His eyes bugged out as Kushina leaned down and pressed her impressive bust against his bare chest. I thought about what you said last night, she said with a husky voice. Naruto's eyes started to glaze over. And she trailed off as her lips hovered over his own. He could feel her breath upon him as she breathed. He took a shuddering breath as he felt his member harden from her position and the tone of her voice. And he asked with anticipation in his voice. Kushina suddenly giggled. What Naruto didn't see was the massive blush that spread across her face as she felt his erection rub against her. Big, she thought. She returned her attention to Naruto. Someone is getting ahead of themselves, she said in the same husky tone as she twisted her hips, rubbing against the head of his member. Naruto's breath hitched. And he asked with anticipation and frustration in his voice. And she suddenly rolled off him as she giggled like a madwoman. Oh, you should see the look on your face, she said as Naruto's lustful look turned to one of confusion. This only made Kushina's giggle turn into full-blown laughter. A few moments later, Naruto's look turned to one of anger. You were toying with me, he accused. Kushina shook her head and settled down enough to talk. Yes, I was, she said with a cheeky grin. But I did think about what you said last night. She turned her head to the side as she looked him directly in the eyes. I can accept that you see me as a woman and not your mother. For now, she admitted, though I hope you do eventually come to see me as your mother. I realize that it might not ever happen. Naruto could see the steel in her eyes. As long as you don't take anything too far, she said, I don't mind continuing our relationship just like yesterday, even including the teasing, she said with her emerald orbs twinkling with mischief. I have never had as much fun in my life, she said happily. Naruto smiled and suddenly pounced on her, laying his body on top of her. He let his body mold to hers as his erection poked her again and her s were smashed up against his bare chest. He smiled foxily. I wouldn't do what you just did again, Kushina-chan. I think you're making it hard for me to resist, he said, accentuating his words with a thrust of his hips to show her what happened. Kushina's own eyes glazed slightly and Naruto chuckled as he was suddenly standing at the side of the bed looking down at her. Kushina pouted cutely. Naruto chuckled. Seriously, don't do that again. It is hard enough to control myself without having you on top of me, and if Kyuubi manages to break through and yell at me, I don't know if I could stop my instincts, he admitted. One downside to being his container, I am much more instinctual than a normal person, he said. Kushina nodded and Naruto smiled at her. Then let's go out and talk some more, or would you rather I cook for you and we spend the day here? He offered. Kushina cocked her head to the side. You can cook? She asked. Naruto smiled. Here it is then. The rest of the day rushed by as they both started to get to know each other better. Naruto skipped his training trip and the Sasuke retrieval mission and started his tales on his rescuing of Gaara. Kushina explained how his father had been like in the last war. Time skipped 2 months. Naruto sighed as he looked at Tsunade. AB rank? He asked. Tsunade nodded. Don't start complaining, brat. Your partner will be Kushi-chan, she said as she waved at Kushina. Kushina smiled at him. Well, at least it won't be boring, he said as he smirked at Kushina. The two had grown very close in 2 months. Naruto was set to take the Hokage hat in a few more months and he had taken every spare moment he had to get to know Kushina. They teased each other mercilessly, to the chagrin of most of their friends, but almost all of them had accepted his awkward relationship. Sakura, Lee, and Ino were the only ones who were adamantly refusing to even be seen with them. Kushina herself had found some old friends of hers. Sarutobi Kurenai, Yumino Anko, and Gekko Yugo. Yes, they are all married at this point. Asuma and Hayate did not die. They had been surprised when she was alive. She had been a close confidant of the three and they had been sad when they heard of her death. Naruto had been happy when she found some girlfriends though. The three didn't really like his relationship but they were good friends with the both of them. Why AB rank though? He asked. Tsunade's eye started to twitch. Brad read the damn mission profile and you will see why I let you have this one and not AS rank, she said. Naruto shrugged and opened the scroll starting to read it. Tsunade's face became grim and Kushina started to frown as Naruto's rage became more palpable each second he read the scroll. When he reached the end, his eyes snapped to Tsunade. I accept Hokage-sama. Surprising even Tsunade as he actually called her by her title. How long have they been in business? He asked. 1 month. I only just found their location. She answered. They are about 3 days travel from here. Naruto's blue orbs were cold as ice as Kushina tried to figure out what was wrong. They will be dead in a day, Ba-chan. He stated with absolute certainty in his voice. Naruto, be reasonable. She said. No. Those guys are scum. I won't allow them to live any longer. I will reverse summon Kushina-chan in a few hours. Brief her please. With that, Naruto was gone. He didn't disappear in a flash or a blur. He was simply not there any longer, as his harsh training gave him the ability to move so fast he was unseeable. Tsunade sighed. Kushina turned to Tsunade. What the hell type of mission did you give him? She asked. Tsunade's face turned grim as she said, there is a cell of bandits that has been operating under the radar for the past month that is led by a doctor. A particularly sick doctor that is as smart as he is insane, she said. Kushina's eyes were locked on Tsunade. He apparently managed to make some drug that is, in essence, a mind rape drug, she said with disgust in her voice. Kushina's eyes narrowed. When injected, the drug basically wipes the person out and leaves them a complete blank state, allowing the person who injected it to turn the person into anything they want. You can imagine what bandits use this for, she said with pure hate in her voice. Slaves. Kushina growled out as Tsunade nodded. I finally managed to track them down. I'm sending Naruto and yourself because Naruto has no mercy for rapists and you will probably be the only one who will be able to calm him down once he is done destroying the camp. You can help, but just please do not get injected with anything in that psychos camp, she warned. Kushina nodded. Dismissed. Get ready for his summons in a few hours. Tsunade said to Kushina's nod. Time skip. Naruto's chakra disappeared back into him as he finished killing off that sick of a doctor. The bastard had even tried to improve on his perfect drug, so that it would actually just lock the woman away in a cage within their own minds and they would still be conscious of what was happening to their own bodies. Naruto had been in such a rage that he had used the Kyuubi's chakra for the first time since Madara's fight. Kid, you have finally broken down the seal enough for me to talk to you completely. Good job. The voice of the Kyuubi no Kitsune sounded in his mind. Naruto grit his teeth. Shut up, you baka Kitsune. He thought back. Hey, don't be yelling at me. It's you humans who are the real demons here, Kit. Without those bastards you keep killing, you would never have even used my Yuki, the great Kitsune shot back. Naruto hung his head. Besides, shouldn't you be summoning that hot piece of that as your mother? It said, reminding Naruto of Kushina. Oh crap, Naruto said with his eyes widening. I forgot to summon her. She is gonna be so pissed, he said while grabbing his head in anguish. Ha, you can fight anyone off, but when it comes to your precious peoples you're as docile as a rabbit. Kyuubi remarked. Naruto narrowed his eyes. You know, I can think of a few things to conjure up in my mind that might shut your UP, he said. The Kyuubi laughed maliciously. Try me, it said. Naruto smiled mischievously. The next thing he heard was, Kit, stop it, Kit, get rid of it. It's too damn fluffy and cute, get rid of it. Kyuubi bellowed. Naruto let out a content sigh and the image of multiplying puppies was removed from his mindscape. Now be quiet as I summon her, he said. All he received was silence. Naruto sighed and got ready to be beaten the crap out of as he ran through some hand signs and slammed his hand on the ground, reverse summoning. He said, and with a poof of smoke Kushina appeared in that same form-fitting outfit she liked to wear when she came over to just spend the day at his house. Kushina's eyes panned around and took in the destruction of the camp. You already killed them all, didn't you? She deadpanned as Naruto scratched the back of his neck sheepishly. He. Oh no, he said hesitantly. Goddammit Naruto-kun, now what am I supposed to do with these? She asked as she pulled some high-grade explosive tags from somewhere. Naruto laughed warily. Blow up the laboratory so no one can get his research. He offered helpfully. Kushina turned a deadpan look at him as she said, "You had that thought out, didn't you?" she accused. Naruto turned around and started to walk away whistling a tune. "No, I didn't," he said. Naruto-kun, I think we are going to have a problem," Kushina said as he walked away. Naruto turned back around with a question on his lips until he felt her shunshin behind him and pull something out of his back. "I think they injected you with something. It says, Experiment 914, she said as she presented the syringe to Naruto. "Well, I think we should see what it is, even if Kyuubi can purge it of my system," Naruto said. Naruto and Kushina walked into the building Naruto had been standing in front of. The two walked down a few hallways ending in a huge room with a large metallic table sitting in the middle of it. There were jars and containers of odd liquids along with multiple syringes. Naruto walked over to a certain table where a particularly large bloodstain was and started to shuffle through the papers located there. Kushina walked up next to him. "The doctor?" she asked quietly as he shuffled through papers. "Yeah, he was trying to improve on his drug," Naruto replied with cold fury. He felt Kushina turn and glare at the bloodstain almost as if she wished he would get back together in order for her to blow him to hell again. "I'm going to go place these tags," Kushina said as she walked away from him. Naruto nodded and shuffled his feet as he felt it get a bit hotter in the lab. Naruto continued going through the mountains of papers here. He sighed as he read about more and more depraved experiments this man had done. He was almost as sick as Orochimaru. He had experiments on grafting animals into humans so that the human would gain more speed or better muscles. Experiments that ruined a person's mind break because he was trying to create a super soldier that would be able to best an entire army. Naruto chuckled as he thought of that. He was capable of doing such a thing. He pulled on his collar, letting some of his accumulated body heat free from his shirt. "Ah, here it is," Naruto said as he pulled a paper with the heading, Experiment 914 feet from the pile of papers. "Let's see. Initial testing, failed. Well, that's good. But what is it supposed to do? Objective, attempts to cease UAL drive. What? Guess it is good it failed. I wonder why though," Naruto said as he read further. "Testing was a failure, instead drug seems, too." Naruto trailed off. "Kyuubi, you big furball, flush my system now," Naruto mentally screamed as he grabbed his jacket and removed it. "Ha ha ha, sweet justice. No way in hell, Kit, this is going to be one hell of a show," Kyuubi replied as he enjoyed the panic his host was exhibiting. Kushina walked back into the room and was looking around as she said, "Ready to go?" Then her eyes met Naruto. "Are you alright?" Naruto turned and nodded at her. "I'm fine, just Kyuubi acting up a bit. I found out what the drug is supposed to do," he said. Kushina held her hand out for the paper in his hand. "What does it do?" she asked. Naruto incinerated the paper in his hand, something that I am glad I have Kyuubi in my system for. "Let's leave it at that," he said with a shudder. Kushina nodded after seeing him shudder. What she didn't know was that the shudder was from another source. "Let's go," Naruto said and brushed past her. He shuddered again. "Ha ha ha." Kyuubi laughed in his mind. Kushina nodded and set a few explosive tags in the lab before following him out of the compound again. Once the two reached the outside, they both jumped straight into the trees and headed out to Konoha. About 2 minutes later, Kushina held up a hand sign and said, "Katsu." An enormous explosion signified the destruction of the awful base of depravity. Time skip 1 day. Naruto shuddered again as he could feel the drug taking effect. Damn it all. Drug. Kyuubi. He thought to himself. If you would have just listened to me last night, then you wouldn't be having this problem. Though continue trying to resist, you know you will eventually give in. Kyuubi taunted from behind his cage. Naruto-kun. He heard Kushina say from behind him. He stopped on a branch and turned around to see her. Yes? He asked with a small smile. Kushina landed next to him and walked up to him. Naruto stiffened as his enhanced senses were assaulted by her presence. He took a deep sniff of the air, taking in the musty smell of the forest with the trees and dirt surrounding them. This was overpowered, though, by Kushina's smell of butternut cream. A sweet smell that brought his mouth to water. His breath hitched as she drew closer, and he could feel the heat coming off of her body from their traveling today. It was about mid-afternoon. He heard each step she took as a thundering crash, as if she were a giant stepping on the ground. Then her hand reached out and laid upon his head. Her skin is soft and perfect, as he remembered from each time he touched it. He shuddered again as she leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his. "You're burning up, Naruto-kun. What's wrong?" she asked with concern as his senses went haywire with each breath she breathed straight into his nostrils. Her scent was overpowering now. Nothing. Just the drug being flushed from my system," he said as he took a shaky step away from her. Kushina's eyes narrowed. "There is a town right over there," she said as she pointed through a few trees. "We are going to go get a room and you are going to rest until that drug is out of your system." Naruto shook his head. It would be better to go back, he started, only to be cut off. "We are going to get a room, Naruto-kun," she stated in a tone that brokered no arguing. Naruto sighed and allowed her to lead the way as he jumped off after her. It took only a few minutes for the two to reach the outskirts. Naruto was breathing a bit heavier as he walked behind Kushina. He clamped a hand over his nose so he couldn't breathe in her scent and allowed his eyes to close, leading himself completely with his hearing and sensing chakra. He kept repeating in his mind, "Just keep in mind she is a precious person." The two entered a nice hotel. Kushina walked up to the counter with Naruto still behind her and spoke to the man behind the counter. "One room, please," she said. Naruto's eyes shot open. "2 rooms," he said, his hand coming from his nose so he would sound normal. Though only Kushina caught the note of something in his voice. She narrowed her eyes as she looked at him. "1 room. I won't leave you alone in your state," she said. Naruto shook his head. "2 rooms," he insisted. Kushina glared at him. "Is there something you're not telling me?" she asked as she looked him over, taking in his exaggerated breathing along with his hunched shoulders. The man behind the counter said, "There is currently only 1 room available, sir. So if you wish to lay in a separate room from the lady, then you will have to find another hotel," he said, looking at Naruto. He turned to Kushina and added with a bit of a leer, "The only room left is the king's suite, which is quite expensive, milady." Naruto growled at the man, "We will take it. And you will keep your leers to yourself, or you will find yourself missing something important to every man," he hissed out. Kushina's eyes widened as she heard Naruto defend her without her even seeing the man's leer. They widened further as she saw Naruto's eyes. The man turned to Naruto with a sneer but was stopped cold as he was faced, not with Naruto's blue eyes, but Kyuubi's malignant blood red. He took Naruto's credit card and handed the key over to him without a sound. All of this happening within seconds, and Naruto had already swept away from Kushina and the man in a hurry as he walked to the stairs. Kushina suddenly regained her senses and, with a backwards glare at the pervert, she followed Naruto to their room. "That was perfect, Kit," Kyuubi roared in his head. "Your fiery-haired mate was so stunned. That was so satisfying," Kyuubi said as he finally saw the fear his eyes transfixed into others. Strangely enough, he knew Kushina wasn't afraid of those eyes. "Mate," he thought back to the great Kitsune. Kyuubi scoffed. "Don't you try to lie to me, you blonde-haired bastard. She may be your birth mother, but you see her as your mate. No one else has caught your eye, and I must say, even as an opposite species, I find her attractive," the great Kitsune admitted. Naruto stopped as his mind whirled at that. "What?" he thought in a rage. "You're only proving it, Kit. Stop trying to fight what that drug is doing. You won't ever make a move without it, and I won't have you dying a virgin." So I am not purging your system, he said as he heard Kyuubi curl up. This is your chance, it said before he felt his connection cut with him and he realized he was in front of his room. Naruto sighed and took a deep breath. He stiffened as Kushina's scent invaded his nose. He reached forward and shakily unlocked the door. He walked into the room and noticed it was pretty well furnished, but he was too focused on the woman behind him, her very presence overshadowing everything else. Kushina walked past him and jumped onto the bed, acting a little like a kid as she twisted and turned on top the sheets, not help Naruto at all. He watched as her muscles flexed and moved her body in interesting ways before she propped herself up on one elbow, laying on her side as her other hand lay along the top of her body, giving off a Y pose. This is pretty nice. But are you going to tell me what's going on, Naru-kun? She asked. Naruto's face contorted as he felt a particularly large jolt come from his body as he took in her pose. He shuddered and looked at Kushina. I need a bath. A cold bath, he muttered the last part under his breath. He brushed past the bed and shed all but his pants and underwear as he walked across the room and entered the bathroom. He turned the cold water on full and let the bath fill as he took his pants and boxers off his erect member, slapping up as he pulled his boxers down. He groaned as he felt it pulsing heavily, wanting relief. As soon as the tub was filled, he jumped into it and let out a grunt as the freezing cold waters washed over his heated body. He laid his head back and relaxed for a few moments before he felt his erection start to throb painfully. He grunted and leaned down so his head was right by the water. He suddenly plunged his head into the water and screamed out, allowing the bubbles to muffle his screaming. Naruto leaned back up and sighed as he felt his body stay heated despite the water's effects. He leaned back again and was suddenly on his feet as he heard the door to the bedroom crash inwards. Naru-kun, what was that screaming? Kushina said as she looked at his face. Naruto's body shuddered again as he looked at Kushina in her attire. She had not changed out of that form-fitting uniform. But he sighed as he realized nothing was wrong. Kushina herself suddenly noticed something that was not right. She waved her hand at Naruto's erection. Is this what has been bothering you? She asked. Naruto suddenly plunged back into the freezing cold water and shook his head, saying he didn't want to talk about it. Kushina sighed. This is the drug, isn't it? She goosed. Naruto's silence was all her answer. Why doesn't the Kyuubi flush it? She asked curiously. Naruto looked down but said, it was supposed to make the injected sterile, but it seems it does the opposite, making the person's libido go insane, he explained. Kyuubi won't flush it because. Naruto trailed off, not wanting to lie to her but not wanting her to know the truth either. Because? Kushina questioned. Naruto mumbled something under his breath about, stupid fox Biju, before raising his voice, he sees you as my mate and sees nothing wrong with the two of us doing that, he said. Kushina's blank face was his answer. He stared at her for a few more moments until she asked in a emotionless tone, what will happen if you don't, you know? Naruto flushed but said, it will fade in a few days, he said. Kushina nodded and closed the door again before he heard her walking away and sitting on the bed. He sighed. Baka Ero Kitsune. He thought as he laid back in his cold bath. Kushina's mind whirled. Kyuubi sees her as Naruto's mate. What the hell? Besides that, it was obvious that drug was affecting him, but he was also affected by her own actions. Those shudders were him ignoring his body to avoid doing anything to her. He was considerate and hurt himself in order to avoid hurting her. Then she thought of the past 2 months. No, she was not his mother but the best friend she could be to him. She knew she loved him, but was that a mother's love or another type? He had been quite understanding and loving to her. The time she spent with him was even greater than with Minato. Then she thought of what she just saw. She had felt it the 3rd day she knew him, but seeing it was another thing. His member was enormous. Much bigger than Minato's. A 10-inch pole that was as thick as 3 fingers. She held her fingers up in front of her eyes. She blushed as she thought of how big it was, with all its veins pulsing and the angry red color it had been while it was swollen. She didn't know what she needed to do. But her mind screamed at her. You know what you want to do. It said. Kushina blushed. But could she do it with her own son? You haven't treated him like a son at all. Stop fooling yourself. Her mind answered back. But what does my heart say? She asked. Her mother had always said to follow her heart. The blonde fox. She received as she looked into her heart. She blushed deep red as she finally nodded, knowing what she was going to do, but she had to prepare a bit. So she undressed herself and looked at her body in the mirror, mapping out curves that no one had seen in 18 years. She smiled. She was still youthful with her Uzumaki regeneration. She would look young and healthy until she was almost 180. She removed her bra but kept her red cotton panties on and put an oversized shirt on to hide her body while sitting down on the bed waiting for Naruto to come out. She couldn't believe she was actually going to do this. Her heart beat loudly in her ears as she stared at the bathroom door awaiting her son. The thought brought a familiar heat to her loins. She rubbed her legs together unconsciously as she sat there. She had decided that she wanted to do this, but did that mean it was right? Her inner musings were cut short as the doorknob started to turn and her heart leapt in her chest as she thought to herself, it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong, just that I am helping him as any parent would to stop their child from hurting. She rationalized as she spread her legs slightly, allowing a hint of her red panties to be seen by him as she relaxed on the bed. She watched, with no small amount of trepidation, the door swing open and Naruto step out of the bath with his blonde hair sticking up yet seemingly falling around him because of its dampness. Her eyes traveled down from his hair to his still closed eyes. She took this moment to take in his chiseled chest, taking note of a scar, the shape of a fist that seemed cauterized at the edges of the scar tissues. The only blemish on his, otherwise perfect, skin. Her eyes traveled further down as he took a few steps in with his eyes still closed. She saw he only had his boxers on, but his pants were in his hands. She wondered why he didn't put them back on, but it was quickly answered as she saw his erection still raging and poking at the flimsy piece of cloth in front of it, the only thing keeping it hidden from her gaze. Her gaze went further and she took in his muscled legs, and she idly wondered how hard his thrusts would be. She blushed red and her eyes snapped to his as she sensed movement from his lids. She smiled at him as his jaw was suddenly on the ground and his member twitched from his sight. She felt the heat in her loins increase as his hungry gaze traveled over her exposed body and finally rested on her eyes as she smiled at him. His gaze was half-lidded and she could see the pure lust in his eyes as he stared at her. But he did not move. He simply stared into her eyes, indicating that he wanted to do something, but his indomitable will stopped him. Her smile widened and she patted the bed next to her. Come sit here, Naru-kun, we have something to discuss, she said coyly. Naruto nodded dumbly, the lust having apparently taken over his usually clear mind. His eyes locked on her panties as he walked forward. Kushina felt the heat increase even further and she cursed herself for ignoring her own needs for so long. After what seemed an eternity to both parties, Naruto finally sat down next to Kushina and turned to her, his eyes flashing to her as she was jostled by his seating. She smiled at him. Naruto groaned as he awoke from the night of passion he and Kushina had. He was on his back with his arm curled around Kushina as she laid her head on his shoulder, her S laying on his chest as she slept peacefully, their lower areas covered by the sheets. It seems Kushina was a natural gusher. Naruto chuckled as he looked at the ruined bedsheets. He looked down at Kushina and was happy he had found a partner in her. Told ya Kit. Though you will probably outlive her. It said. Doesn't matter. I won't outlive her by long, your Yuki saw to that. He replied. His voice stirred Kushina and she opened her eyes to look up at Naruto. She smiled slightly. That was amazing. She said. Naruto's smile couldn't have been brighter. You were. He said as he leaned in for a kiss. What he didn't see was the flash of guilt that appeared on her face. Kushina pushed away from him, leaving her body to him as she stood up and looked away. Naruto turned a curious look to her, though inside he could feel his heart breaking as he was almost sure of what was about to happen. That shouldn't have happened. I shouldn't have done that. she said to herself. A parent helping her child to stop hurting. What kind of excuse is that? She whispered. Naruto's eyes hardened slightly, but he still said, "What's wrong?" Concern obvious in his voice. He saw Kushina stiffen, and for a moment she seemed to argue with herself before she started to gather her clothes, putting them on as she spoke. "We shouldn't have done this," she said. Naruto shook his head. "Why not?" "Because we are mother and son, this is just wrong," she said. Naruto's eyes hardened. "Is that really the way you think?" he asked, a hint of something dangerous underneath it. Kushina hesitated for a moment before she straightened up after grabbing the last of her clothes and slipping her shirt on. "Yes," she said as she turned around to face him. She almost flinched back. Naruto stared at his mother with cold eyes that she hadn't seen since he had talked with her the night she entered Konoha. "Very well," he said emotionlessly as he climbed out of bed and began to gather his things as well. Kushina watched as, within a minute, Naruto was fully dressed and ready to go. "Konoha is about a day's long run from here, we should reach it at nightfall. Let's go," Naruto said as he walked out of the room. Kushina stood there, biting her lip for a few seconds, pondering what she had done, before turning and leaving the raunchy-smelling room, closing the door behind her, leaving the evidence of their debauchery to the maids of the hotel. Time skip nightfall. Kushina looked at Naruto's back as they landed on the main road leading to Konoha. They would be there in less than 5 minutes, but they couldn't tree jump as policy stated you entered the village through its gates and in plain sight of the guards. Naruto had set a grueling pace with his speed, but she had kept up just fine. Her training had not slackened at all, and she had been sparring with Naruto recently too, so she could move faster than most anyone else. She truly felt that what she had done was wrong and did not try to change her opinion on it, but it was obviously hurting Naruto. His emotionless facade rarely ever came back in front of her, and it was only really there when Sasuke would show up, or perhaps Sakura. The rest of the time he was easily the most fun to be around in the life of wherever he went. But, on the way back, since he had spoken to her in the hotel, he had not said a word, instead ignoring her and speeding up anytime she tried to draw near him to speak. She knew he had said that he would avoid her if she tried to be a mother, but she was just trying to mend her friendship with him. Despite what she had said, her heart ached as she saw him reject her. It was obvious he had been extremely hurt by her declaration. Now was her chance though, he couldn't run from her. Not with protocol. She walked up next to him and saw him stiffen, but he did not increase his pace, as that would be seen as hostile by the guards, which she could see were coming into view. "Naruto-kun," she said while trying to lay a hand on his shoulder. He took a step to the right, all without breaking his stride, as his eyes flashed over to her. "What do you want, Kushina-san?" he asked in his cold, emotionless tone. His eyes as if an icy pond reflecting anything they saw back at her, not allowing his normally expressive eyes to show anything of his inner feelings. She flinched slightly. "I guess I deserve that," she said sadly. "I just wanted to apologize for saying that back in the hotel. I didn't mean it," she added quietly. "Saying what exactly, Kushina-san?" he asked coldly, his fury almost palpable as he continued, "That it was a mistake having with me, or that you and I are mother and son." He calmed himself with a few deep breaths and looked back into Kushina's sad eyes. "It matters not. You have made your feelings clear. We can never have the relationship I would want anyways. After this, please don't speak to me again," he said. Kushina stopped dead in her tracks as his words registered. Her heart stopped and her eyes widened. She stared at his back as he continued walking. "I am going to turn the report in. You may go home. Live a good life," he said. The guards waved him through the gate, and with that, he disappeared. Kushina's mind shut down as she heard his declaration. Her heart breaking in two as she felt him distance himself. A searing pain erupted in her chest as if her heart was being wrenched from its place with a burning fork. She clutched her chest with one hand as she walked forward, unconsciously providing her papers for admission before walking away from the gates, leaving her papers with them. Her eyes stared ahead of her, seeing nothing as her body unconsciously led her to her apartment. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. The most prominent of the last scene still replaying in her head. After this, please don't speak to me again, he had said before walking off, as if they had not just spent a night of love-making, as if she were nothing to him. Her hands reached forward and opened her apartment door. She walked inside and shut the door behind her as her unseeing eyes gazed around her living room. It was littered with pictures of herself and Naruto. Of the past 2 months they had spent together and what they had done. She walked further into her apartment, until a realization struck her. This used to be his apartment, she thought as she walked into her bedroom. She allowed her body to fall onto her bed, and then, only when she was completely alone and blocked by the seals built into her walls, did she allow herself to realize what she had just done. That same searing pain struck again and her body shook as she realized she had just pushed away the last piece of happiness she had in her life. Naruto appeared in Tsunade's office, his emotionless mask in full force as he looked at his Ba-chan and Jiraiya. Here to report, Ba-chan, he said in an emotionless tone, drawing their attention away from each other and to him. The two elder shinobi both took on serious looks as they saw Naruto's shinobi mode, something that hadn't made an appearance since his fight with Madara. Go ahead, Tsunade said as she steepled her hands and rested her chin on her hands. Naruto proceeded to tell of how he ran straight to the camp and obliterated it with some of Kyuubi's own techniques. He explained how he had summoned Kushina, then they had blown the base up and proceeded home. He left out he could talk with Kyuubi and the night Kushina and he had spent in the hotel. Tsunade and Jiraiya both knew he was hiding something. He was obviously pissed about the mad doctor, but something else had their godson ruffled. Is that it, Naruto? Tsunade asked, not using her nickname for him. Naruto didn't hesitate at all as he replied, Hi Hokage-sama. Tsunade and Jiraiya frowned. Gaki, what's wrong? Jiraiya asked, letting his concern show through. Naruto turned his eyes to Jiraiya and he caught a glimpse of the overwhelming sadness Naruto was feeling right now. He felt his breath hitch as Tsunade's did the same right next to him. Something you can't help with, Jiraiya. I will be fine, but I need a few days, he said, his emotionless mask cracking a bit at the sight of his two most precious peoples. Tsunade looked at him critically before waving her hand. Very well. I will call for you in 3 days, Naruto, she said, giving him a pointed look that said they were going to talk about it. Naruto nodded, but he was certain he was not going to tell them just yet, as he wanted to let himself accept this. Naruto shunshined away. Tsunade sighed. You know it has something to do with Kushina, Jiraiya said. Before today they were nigh inseparable for 2 months and now he shows up without her. He questioned. Tsunade nodded. Yes, but this is their life and I don't want to interfere before they have a chance to work it out for themselves, she said. Jiraiya nodded and the two looked out over Konoha watching the sun set. Naruto appeared in front of his clan house. He sighed as he opened the door and walked inside. He managed to make it to his room before his emotionless mask started to break. His eyes grew blurry as tears collected. He blinked and felt them run down his face as he allowed his body to fall onto his bed, his clothes having somehow come off as he walked to his bedroom. He laid there in just his boxers, clutching his aching chest. It's just like Sakura, he thought. Kit, Kyuubi said from its cage. What do you want now, Kyuubi? Naruto thought back through his grief. Kyuubi emerged from the dark, showing its full body in splendor to his container. He leaned down and put his massive eye in front of him. I'm sorry, he said. Naruto blinked as he looked up at the giant fox within him. What? He said. I'm sorry, he repeated. Naruto stared up at the Kyuubi. Why me? He asked quietly. Why must I go through life alone? He cried. The Kyuubi just stared at him with pain in its eyes, for the first time feeling something other than rage and evil. Naruto, without a second thought, walked forward and into the cage, surprising Kyuubi. Naruto walked to Kyuubi's backside and rubbed a few tails, enjoying the feeling of softness. He finally just laid down on some tails and pulled the rest on top of him as he let his grief consume him. Kyubi just watched sadly as his seemingly indomitable jailer cried his heart out. Time skip 2 weeks. Kushina looked up as her door was knocked upon. She had sequestered herself into her apartment for the better part of a week. She hadn't felt like leaving as she wallowed in grief over what she had done. When she had finally decided she could pick herself up, she was determined to fix her relationship with Naruto. She wouldn't have intimate relations, but she did want to have his friendship back. Unfortunately, he refused to see her, or if he did, he ignored her completely. When she had finally managed to get an answer out of him, he had only one thing to say: I warned you what would happen if you decided to only see me as a son and treat me like it. You ignored me. When I finally think you decided you could see more than that, you go and turn around that thought not even 5 seconds after I thought it. It was just like what Sakura did when she confessed to me. I have no interest in you, Kushina-san. Leave me alone, he had said before disappearing from her sight. She had come back to her apartment and spent the last day and a half trying to figure out what she could do. She maintained that what she had done was simply to protect her son from hurting and was in no way her own desire to have with him. She refused to accept the fact she had enjoyed and actually wanted more of what he had given her, even if it was subconsciously. So, she was now stuck in a life with no happiness, and the only relative she actually had resented her for actions she knew she should have avoided but could not come to admit that was the case. She sighed as she opened her door and said, yes. She was utterly surprised when she found herself thrown back into her apartment, redressed in a red cocktail dress, and was being pushed back towards the door with heels in her hands as her 3 friends looked at her. Enough moping around. I don't know what has gotten into you, but let's have some fun. Anko said from behind her as she pushed. I rarely agree with Anko, but you seem to have been depressed lately and I think getting out would be good for you. Kurenai said. Let's go party while our husbands watch the kids. It's been too long. Yugo added. Kushina smiled slightly at her friends. She knew they were trying to help, so she let them pull her across town and into a bar where 4 of the most beautiful kunoichi took a booth by themselves, drawing the attention of the crowd. And so the drinks started to flow and the 4 kunoichi began to talk about their problems, namely the men in their lives. Kami Asuma is so bad with those damn nicotine patches. It is much better than those damn cigarettes, but he gets so temperamental without them. Kurenai said as she drank her sake. Oh, if Iruka-kun wasn't so damn good in bed, I would castrate him for spending so much time grading papers. Anko retorted. Kushina blushed slightly at that comment, but none of the kunoichi seemed to notice. Asuma is great in bed, it just kissing him, he tastes like ash. Kurenai admitted. Hayate may seem sick, but damn if he isn't the dominant one in bed, that guy sure can hide some serious technique behind that cough. Yugo said to the chagrin of the other 2 ladies. What about you, Kushina? Anyone catch your eye? Anko asked teasingly. Kushina blushed slightly and looked down as an image of Naruto flashed across her mind. Naruto. Why would I? She thought. Oh, someone did. Anko said as if making some big discovery. Komon, give us the details, we want to know everything about him. What does he look like? How strong is he? How is he in bed? Yugo suddenly rambled off. Anko looked at Yugo as Kushina blushed a heavy red from the last question. You stole my buzz. Anko accused of Yugo. Yugo shrugged. You were too slow. She said. I was pausing for dramatic effect. Anko retorted. A clearing of Kurenai's throat was enough to show that they had gone off into their own little world, and they both returned with big grins on their faces. So? Kurenai asked. Kushina shook her head and swirled her sake. I don't want to talk about him, she said, embraced that her mind immediately threw Naruto at her as her boyfriend material. Honestly, it wasn't that surprising. She shouldn't be surprised, as he was the only male she actually spent time with in almost 2 decades. Of course he would be prime material, but the fact he was everything she wanted in a boyfriend, and more, her mind chimed in, causing her to blush deepen, did compound on the fact. Oh, she already did him. How is he? I wanna know. Anko said while bouncing in her seat. She may be older, but her personality was much the same. Kushina just shook her head. Drop it, even if you knew you wouldn't approve, so just forget it. She sounded regretful at the end of that. Did she miss what Naruto had done? No. She only missed his company. The three women all narrowed their eyes but dropped the subject in favor of a more popular one. Poor Naruto. He is going to be so crushed. Kurenai said as she looked down at her sake. Kushina's head snapped to Kurenai's, a fact Anko and Yugo noticed. What do you mean by that? She asked. Kurenai looked up. It's just, every time he has a female in his life they all seem to leave. I mean, the guy went out with like 4 girls and all 4 of them left him for one of his friends, she explained. Kushina's eyes widened. Poor guy probably thinks he's destined to be alone all his life. Kurenai ended. Yugo picked up as she too realized what Kurenai was saying. He was getting awfully attached to you. He may not love you like them and you may not be going out, but he will feel like you are abandoning him for some other guy, she said. Of course you're not. It's just you might want to break it to him slowly. Anko said as she rubbed her curse mark, more than aware of what Naruto had went through than most anyone else. Kushina's mind whirled as the implications she hadn't thought of crashed down onto her, weighing her down. She gripped the table hard as her vision faded and she saw the 2 months they spent just getting to know each other and spending time together just as a couple would. How he had restrained himself from taking that next step with her until she opened the floodgates he had kept on his heart and spent the night making love to him. How she must have sounded when she told him that they were mother and son and shouldn't be together. How his words about her and Sakura were truer than most anything ever spoken before. Her eyes misted as she hung her head in shame. Stupid, 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 Kushina said, accentuating each word with a pound of her fist on the wooden table, shaking it with each blow. Hey now, he would want you to be happy, he isn't going to hold this against you. Kurenai said as she wrapped an arm around Kushina since she was sitting next to her. Kushina just let her head fall on the table and let her tears spill out as quiet sobs racked her body. How could I have been so blind? She whispered to herself. What's wrong? Yugo asked as her hand came across the table and gripped Kushina's. Kushina just sat there for a few moments before Kurenai's voice sounded again. It's Naruto, isn't it? She said. Kushina's eyes snapped to hers, but Anko and Yugo were both confused. Of course she is talking about Naruto, who else would we be talking about? Anko said. Kurenai shook her head as she stared into Kushina's emerald orbs, bloodshot with tears. No, what I mean is the man she likes is Naruto. Kurenai stated, bringing about shocked looks from Anko and Yugo. Kushina hung her head. I know it's wrong, but I just couldn't stop it. He was the perfect friend from the start, always there, completely supportive, anything I needed and he was there for it. Everything was going great. Her voice barely more than a whisper as she spoke. Then he was assigned a mission to destroy a base where this mad doctor was making a mind rape drug and using it to make slaves. 3 sources of Ki flowed from the booth as the kunoichi felt their anger from such a thing. Kushina continued ignoring their ki. He obliterated the base, all by himself. He tore the doctor to shreds with the Kyuubi's chakra. All 3 kunoichi nodded. As much as Naruto was a legend, so was his temperament about perverts. He summoned me after and I noticed he had been injected with something. We blew the base up and started to return home. He was a bit aloof from me after he found out what the drug was, but he never told me the effects. She explained. So, on the second day, about mid-afternoon, I noticed he was running a bit of a fever. I forced him to take a night and rest to allow Kyuubi to flush his system. When the attendant leered at me, Naruto growled at him and threatened to castrate him if he even looked at me again. He taped into Kyuubi's chakra to enhance his threat, she said quietly. The girls were all leaning forward, enraptured in the story as all traces of surprise left their faces. They were willing to listen to their friend. We got upstairs and almost immediately he ran into the bathroom and began taking a cold shower. I wondered what was wrong but suddenly heard him screaming in the bathroom, so I kicked the door in. At this Kushina blushed and Anko gained a mischievous glint, but Kushina continued before she could start to tease her. he was completely and had a raging hard-on. Apparently, the drug enhanced his libido and he was having trouble controlling it around me, she admitted to the shock of all present, even Kuranai. So I replaced the door and argued with myself over what to do. Eventually I decided to relieve him so that the drug would be purged. I asked why Kyubi hadn't flushed it, but he replied with something I hadn't expected. She paused before taking the plunge. Apparently Kyubi sees me as Naruto's mate and didn't feel it necessary to remove the urge. She blushed as the girls' shocked faces were accompanied with dropped jaws. We spent the night making love, and when we woke up, she bit her lip as her tears reappeared. I immediately felt guilty. Even though my rationalization was I was helping my child stop hurting, I knew I shouldn't have done what I did. She shook her head. I told him as such and he asked me if I was sure about that. When I answered yes, he turned into a cold, emotionless person I met when I first saw him. I don't know what to do. I just want my Naru-kun back, she said as she started to cry again. The three women sat there stunned as they saw their friend break down and cry. Each holding their own thoughts, but as their eyes locked they knew what they had to do. But first, to test it. So, Enko started getting Kushina to look back up. How was he? She asked with a mischievous grin. Kushina spluttered. What? She asked. How was he? Enko repeated. You know, in bed. Yugo added. Kushina blushed a deep red, but she stared at her friends and asked, You're not disgusted? I did it with my own son, she exclaimed, though it was only loud enough for them to hear. Kuranai shrugged. That depends. How was he? She asked. Kushina looked at her friends for a few seconds. I don't understand. Answer the question, woman, or would you like to just wallow in grief? Enko said. Kushina gulped, then blushed a deep red as her eyes glazed over. In a word, perfect. The three friends grinned as Kuranai said, How big was he? 10 inches erect. 3 fingers wide and just as thick, she said as her face flushed as red as her hair. How did it feel? Yugo asked. Amazing, Kushina said in an airy voice. I could feel his drive deeper and deeper. It wouldn't stop until it reached my womb, and even then he kept thrusting it in. It was even better than Minato's. He was relentless, and the way he moved, he was a virgin, but he made me come before he even put it in. Then, when he did, I could feel every inch as he thrust into my and managed to make me orgasm before he even bottomed out. The three girls had smirks a mile wide as they heard her explanation. When he finally bottomed out, he bumped my cervix and, for the first time, I blacked out for a second before coming back and absolutely loving the feeling of him coming so deep in my has become shaped to his after that night, I'm sure, she admitted. And you say you don't know what you should do? Enko asked in a whisper with incredulity in her voice. Kushina seemed to come back from her night of pleasure as she looked at her friend with a scandalous look. But we are mother and son, she said. Honey, any guy that can make you feel that good, is not your son, not in your eyes and definitely not in his. Yugo said. Kushina sputtered. You don't think this is wrong? She asked hesitantly. Kuranai put her arm around her again. I felt like that only once, do you know when? She asked. Kushina shook her head. The first time Asuma made love to me, she admitted. Kushina's eyes widened. We don't care if he is related to you or not. Hell, he could be your grandson and we wouldn't care, Kuranai said. All we want is for you to be happy, and does Naruto make you happy? Kushina smiled brightly as she said, yes. Then here is what you need to do. You're going to go to his house, march into his room, strip down, and Enko said, trailing off. You're going to show him that you see him, not as a son, not as a friend, not even as a lover, but as a person you want to spend the rest of your life with, and that you will do whatever he wants to make that come true. Yugo said. Kushina's eyes misted, but she simply smiled at her friends. Thank you, she whispered. Now why exactly are you still here? Kuranai asked. I can't wait until we show Naruto to Asuma, Iruka, and Hayate, she giggled. Kushina simply disappeared in a shunshin. Did we do the right thing? They are going to be looked down upon, Yugo whispered. Naruto has been looked down upon his whole life. I am willing to bet he will be happier than ever before. Kurenai said. Besides, anyone who wants to look at them wrong will be on the end of mine, yours, Kurenai's, Tsunade's, Jiraiya's, and Naruto's kunai. Anko said. The three women smiled at each other before they raised their drinks. To love. They toasted as they drained their drinks in one swallow. Kushina appeared before Naruto's home. She had permission from the seals to be allowed within the grounds, and apparently Naruto had never changed it. Her green eyes were shining with a determination they hadn't had in years. She reached out with her senses to feel for Naruto. She nodded when she sensed him in his room. She kicked her heels off so she wouldn't make much noise when walking on his floors and proceeded up the small flight of stairs to his front door. She idly noted that she was now only dressed in her cocktail dress and a pair of crimson panties, almost the same outfit she was wearing when she had first made love to him. She opened his door and shut it quietly. She didn't even look at the living room as she passed silently through it, heading straight to his room. She walked up the stairs and reached the second floor. As silent as a ghost, she glided down the hallway and reached his room. She was about to open the door when she heard a choked sob come from inside. She leaned her ear to the door and listened in. Why must I always be alone? Naruto's hoarse voice came through the door. Kushina's heart clenched and she clutched her chest as a pain went through her heart for hurting the one she loved like this. But her previous determination returned full force as she straightened her back and opened his door. She stood in the doorway looking at him as his eyes snapped to her. He was in just a pair of pants. It was obvious he had been crying, but not for very long, as if he had just got home and after he laid down to go to bed he started. His body was clean and his hair was as spiky as ever. Her heart clenched again as his eyes turned icy cold. What do you want? He asked, though his tone was broken by his hoarse voice. Kushina almost flinched, but she held her head high as she walked to his bed, swaying her hips tantalizingly. She enjoyed that his eyes flickered to her hips as she did this. She reached the end of the bed and looked down at him as he lay on his back. She reached behind herself and grabbed the zipper on the back of her dress. She ripped it down and let her dress fall around her legs, leaving her red areola bare to his eyes. She stepped out of the dress and climbed onto the bed, all the time noticing his wary eyes, but she could see the hidden longing in them. She crawled up to his side, took his arm and put it around her body so she was nestled into his armpit, then laid her head on his shoulder, cuddling up to him in just her panties, just as they had been the morning after their night of lovemaking. She reached over and rubbed that fist-shaped scar on his chest. If you tell me something I want to hear, I'll tell you something you want to hear, she said quietly. Haven't you done enough? He asked coldly. She flinched and he could feel it, but she just looked up into his eyes with her own, pleading. Please, she asked, almost as if begging, a lump in her throat. Naruto could never deny his precious peoples, and this was no different. This wasn't the woman that had been insisting they were mother and son, that was obvious, so he nodded. How did you get this scar? You never mentioned anything that would do this, she asked. Naruto stiffened. You remember why I turn cold whenever Sasuke is around? He asked, his voice growing soft and warm like normal, as the hand Kushina had placed on her back started to rub circles. She bit her lip as her body seemed just as sensitive to his touches 2 weeks ago. Yes, she replied. He ran to Orochimaru, right? At Kushina's nod he began, well, we had been sent to retrieve him from Orochimaru's personal bodyguards. Shikamaru, Neji, Kiba, Rock Lee, and Choji, all of us went and we almost died because of it. Each of them dropped off to fight one of the bodyguards, but I went on to reach Sasuke at the Valley of the End, he said as Kushina mewed under his hand as she felt the heat in her loins start to intensify. When I got there, we fought, and it was an intense battle. Without Kyuubi I would have died. This scar. He put his other hand over her own and traced it with her, is from when he plunged two Chidori through my chest. One when I started to use Kyuubi's chakra and once when we clashed underneath the waterfall. Kushina nodded. Now what did you want to tell me? he asked. Kushina drew a shuddering breath and said, "You know how you said you loved my red hair?" she asked. Naruto nodded as the hand that had been making circles suddenly started running through her locks. "Well, when I was younger, I hated my hair," she admitted. "It took your father rescuing me to actually start to like it when he told me he loved my hair." Naruto's eyes widened. "Like father, like son I goose," she said. "Do you know what I told him the first time we made love?" she asked Naruto to his narrowing eyes. She rolled on top of Naruto and pressed herself to his chest. "That there is something I will tell only the people who say they like my hair." She leaned up and whispered in his ear, "Aishiteru Naru-kun." Naruto looked at her with narrowed eyes. "Don't play with me," he said, his voice beginning to regain its icyness. Kushina looked him dead in the eyes and let loose all of the lust she had unconsciously accumulated for him in the past 2 months and 2 weeks. "I'm not lying, Naru-kun. I don't care if we are related. I don't care if others look down on us. All that matters is that I want to be with you for the rest of my life," she said, meaning every word. Naruto's cold exterior began to crack, but he held fast until Kushina spoke again. "I will do anything you ask of me, Naru-kun, anything you want, and I will not ever bring our past into it again, but I want to spend the rest of my life with you. You make me happy," she admitted. She looked down as she whispered, "Do I make you happy?" Naruto's icy cold exterior broke as he felt her emotions pour out of her with that one question, the fear of rejection in her statement. His hands came up and wrapped around Kushina as he leaned in and said, "Yes." Kushina's head shot up and she locked her lips with Naruto's as the two began to make out. Once the two separated, Kushina started to grind on his hips. Naruto groaned and grabbed her hips. "You don't." Kushina shook her head. I want to show you how I really am in bed and without me restraining myself. I want to give myself to you fully," she said as she grabbed his hands, led them to her bare ass, and began grinding him again. Naruto woke up with Kushina still on top of him, and his morning wood poking into her. He sighed and went to move, but Kushina's hands shot up and she said, "Good morning, Naru-koi," while smiling at him. He looked down and replied, "Morning, Koibito." Kushina smiled a million-watt smile. "Aishiteru," she said. Naruto's eyes filled with tears as he said, "Aishiteru." The two lovers kissed and they spent the rest of their longer than normal lives reviving a dead clan. The Uzumaki clan lived on the elemental countries once more.